So, episode 8. We're almost onto the deck, but of course there's still a couple of jobs that are outstanding that need to happen prior. The first is to nail off the shear clamps, which have already been fastened with epoxy, but I now want to add mechanical fastenings, namely nails and roves. One reason is that it will give added security with a mechanical fix. The second is to stay with the authenticity of the original fastenings. So that's the job. And Lewis and Joe have returned once more to give me a hand. So for those who haven't done or seen much of this process, here is my brief description. A nail with a rove is essentially a rivet which joins two or more pieces of material together. Obviously, this method gives a much better fastening than just a nail alone. First, we mark out where we want the fastening, and then the nails are driven through pre-drilled holes. Note that the nails are square and the holes are round. That's how we get a good fix without splitting or damaging the timber.
We're just going to do these ones though. Hey?
So, with the rove suitably driven over the nail, it is then cut to being just proud of the rove. Finally, the end of the nail is then peened. This involves holding the head of the nail with a suitable weighted dolly. You'll notice that there's always a double tap at the end. That's to let the dolly man know that the process is complete and then take the pressure off.
The director yelling out action at the top of his voice and would spook all the horses.
Throw all their riders. Yeah, you happy?
Yeah. So that's enough of that. Let's move on to the other job that needed to be completed prior to putting the deck on. This was to bore out the stern post for the rudder shaft. The original shaft hole had been completely blocked up because a spade rudder had been added to this boat previously, now removed. Not shown here, but I first drilled out with the largest drill I had from top and from bottom. Then the shaft hole is completed to the required diameter with this boring bar with an adjustable cutting bit. The boring bar has to be correctly aligned and is held in place top and bottom with two temporary wooden block bearings. I had been a little scared of tackling this job, but it turned out to be easier than I thought, and the little battery-powered Makita was more than powerful enough. The secret was to take very small bites at a time to bore up the hole. This shaft hole will be lined with a fiberglass tube. More on that when we build the rudder. And finally, I gave the inside of the hull a full coat of gloss enamel, as the access to the stern of the boat would be very limited once the deck was on. So before we could fit any of the deck ply, we needed to fair the deck beams and blocking. I seem to have forgotten to video much of this, but you can see the process is by using a stiff batten to check for the highs and lows between one deck beam and the next. Planing off the high spouts is a fairly straightforward process. And while I don't like to admit it, I did have to add a couple of very thin laminates to a couple of the deck beams to bring them up to the correct height. We're talking 1 to 2 mil. So finally, we are fitting the ply deck. An explanation is required of what we are trying to achieve here. The original decks of these Logan boats from the research of Rowini were 2 layers of tongue and groove timber to a thickness of 1 inch, presumably New Zealand kauri. The underlayer was at 45 degrees to the centre line, while the top layer was laid 4 1/2. Some of the boats had painted canvas decks, some had fully laid timber decks. From the photographs that I have, I believe Petrel did have a laid deck. Regardless, that is what we're going to have, a laid timber deck. But instead of kauri, it will be teak. Kauri in this quantity and quality is just not available. But before we get to that, we need to epoxy glue down these sheets, which are held in place by what's called a streaker. It was a new term to me, so I looked it up. Another meaning is phantom. I guess that makes sense, as they are not real fastenings, just temporary, consisting of a hex screw and a large plywood washer. And as per normal, this is a dry fit. After some consultation with Simon, it was decided that a 9mm marine ply deck would be more than adequate for the substrate deck. On top of the ply will go a layer of fiberglass. This is to encapsulate the plywood because of the end grains, and we need to fully seal the deck against fresh water. Finally, there will be a layer of teak laid fore and aft and glued only, not mechanically fastened, so as not to penetrate the fiberglass and ply. All the sheets were joined over a deck beam and with routed rebates. Once all the sheets were fitted and temporarily fastened, we marked the underside of the sheets where all the deck beams and blocking were located. The sheets were then removed and we marked out and routed a V-joint to the underside to simulate the original tongue and groove boards that would have been laid at a 45-degree angle. With the grooves complete, I then laid out all the sheets and taped off all the areas that will be exposed under the deck. And then gave all these areas 2 coats of wood preserver, or in other words, 2 coats of very thin epoxy, again to seal the ply. You may well note that 2 of the sheets have not been grooved. That's because they are right in the stern of the boat and can never be seen, as the access there is down to less than a foot in depth. Next came a coat of primer undercoat and then 2 top coats. This is all in oil-based enamel. There's no need to be using 2-pack epoxy on the inside of a boat, but I did add some mold inhibitor to the gloss paint, as there's not going to be much circulation of air in the stern of this boat, as there is no aft hatch. So we are finally ready to glue down the ply sheets. This time my good friend Jono, who is one of our regular crew on our Kuta Sylvia, which you can just see bobbing around at the end of our jetty there on the left, he came and gave me a hand. The process is as before, a coat of thickened epoxy applied to both surfaces. And then the ply is screwed down with the streakers. We took great care to make sure that the streakers went into the same holes. So that's it for this episode. I want to thank everybody for their continuing support. Please keep liking, subscribing, sharing, and keep the comments coming. It helps to put the word out, and maybe one day I might even get some money out of YouTube to go towards the boat costs.